before we actually go into the story of Jephtha. And from the picture, I don't know if it's actually quite clear, that is meant to represent Jephtha, that man who doesn't seem to be terribly happy. He's in anguish. And we're going to find out why as we go through the story. And it's got a lot to do with what's happening in the background, which is a bit of a contrast. So he doesn't look happy. He looks like he's in anguish, he's in pain, he's not terribly happy. But actually behind him, it's a joyful scene, right? People are happy, they're dancing, they're singing. And that young girl, who we'll know through the story, who's actually his daughter, is running to embrace him and hug him in joy. But he doesn't seem to be terribly happy about that. So we're going to find out through the story why that scene is going to be a very important scene in the story of Jephtha. But just like I said, in a bit of a background, and like I said, IT is not helping us, but there should be enough there. Can we expand that? Oh, maybe not. Is it disconnected? Oh, sorry. Okay, so while we fix the IT yet again, let's maybe just recap and have a bit of a background. So that is meant to be a verse, when we get the slide, it's a chapter from, or a section, I should say, from chapter 10 in the book of Judges. And where we leave in chapter 10, before we get into the story of Jephtha, here we go, we can read it together. So the Lord said to the children of Israel, did I not deliver you from the Egyptians and from the Amorites and from the people of Ammon? And he keeps, naming so many times where he actually has saved them from. And you cried out to me, and I delivered you from their hand. Yet you have forsaken me and served other gods. Therefore I will deliver you no more. All right? So just keep that in mind. Go and cry out to the gods which you have chosen. Let them deliver you in your time of distress. And that is a summary of the theme that we see through the book of Judges time and time again. You would have probably seen it or heard it in the other stories that you've heard from Joshua, Gideon, and the other judges. And you're going to continue to hear the same theme as you go through the book of Judges, which is the Israelites get into trouble, they feel like they're under pressure, they remember that they have a God, they go and cry out to God. God listens in his mercy, he sends them a judge, a savior, somebody who will help them. And as soon as things get better, they what? Revert back to their old habits. Sin against God, worship other gods, mix with the people of the land, which they were actually asked not to mix with them. They get into trouble, and then they do what? Cry out to God, and again, God in his patience and his mercy, he sends them somebody to save them from the trouble. But God is saying, enough is enough. You've done this so many times. So what does the Israelites actually say in verse 14? In verse 15, I should say. And the children of Israel said to the Lord, we have sinned. Confession. All right? They confess their sins. Do to us whatever seems best to you. Only deliver us this day, we pray. So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord. And this is the verse that I want us all actually to remember. If we remember nothing from today's talk, I want you to remember that verse. And his soul, that is God's soul, his soul could no longer endure the misery of Israel. I'll come back to that verse in a minute, but let's just finish the chapter so that we can have the intro to today's talk about Jephtha. Then the people of Ammon gathered together and encamped in Gilead, and the children of Israel assembled together and encamped in Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, who is the man who will bring the fight against the people of Ammon? I can't read from there. He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. So this is just setting a scene of where Jephtha's stories begin. The people of Ammon, who are actually the enemies of Israel, are camping outside. They're ready to go to war. The people of Israel feel very scared, and they're looking for somebody to lead them in that war, to see if they can actually protect them against the people of Ammon. So that is the story, or the entrance to today's story. But the verse that I want us all to reflect on before we go in is verse 15, or at least the tail end of verse 15, where it says about God, and his soul could no longer endure the misery of Israel. We do the same thing that Israel does through our daily life, where we sin, we get in trouble, we go out to God, we run, we cry, we say, forgive me. God forgives us, gives us another chance, and when things get better, we just revert back to our old lives. That's exactly what we do. We repeat the same cycle. And by doing this time and time and time again, we actually get desensitized about our relationship with sin and how actually that means to God, what that means to God, and how it actually upsets God as well. And because we get desensitized, we do the cycle time and time again, we sometimes assume that God himself gets desensitized to our sin. He sort of hears us time and time again, here we go again. But actually God says what? His soul could no longer endure the misery of Israel. God cannot see us being defeated by sin. He could not see us or endure us being slaves to sin or to the devil. He actually cannot endure that. And that's why in his love, he constantly comes and gives us support and saves us from our own weaknesses. So that's one thing I just want us to sort of touch upon. If we remember nothing from the book of Judges, of all the stories, let's not forget that when we do the same thing that the Israelites do, God is not desensitized to our sin. The other thing I want us to remember before we go in is that because of the kind of culture that we live in the world that we live in today, if anything is free, we automatically think it must be cheap, right? If anything is free, you're going to think, must be very cheap. Must be not of good quality, right? We sometimes, unfortunately, do the same thing when we're dealing with God's grace. God's grace is free. And because it's free, sometimes we think, or we might be mistaken to think, that it's actually cheap, but it's not cheap. Because what was the price that was paid for God's grace toward us? How do we get saved? Through God's grace. What was shed for us on the cross? Jesus' own blood. Grace is free, but it's not cheap. So if nothing else, I want us just to remember those two things, okay? All right, so let's start the story of Jephtha. Now Jephtha the Gileadite was a mighty man of valor, but he was the son of a harlot, and Gilead begot Jephtha. Gilead's wife bore sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephtha out and said to him, "You shall have no inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephtha fled from his brothers and dwelt in the land of Tob, and worthless men banded together with Jephtha and went out raiding with him. So, first things first, in the Old Testament, every name had a meaning. And the meaning usually reflected something about the character or the behavior of that individual. Anybody know what the word Jephtha means? To open. You're absolutely right. Open something very specific. Open their mouth. As we will know, Jephtha was very good at speaking. He really believed that through his words and through his own wisdom, he can actually influence people and get them to behave in a certain way, and we're going to see that. But we're also going to see that that is not always a good idea. We need to be very careful of what we share and what we say and what we think we can actually change by our own words. But that's the meaning of the word Jephtha. So the other thing about this part of the chapter, you see that actually because he was actually the son of a harlot, he was denied any part in the inheritance of his family. All right? He was excluded from any inheritance from his family. And we're going to see that playing out later in the story when he actually is called to sort of serve the people of Israel. But why was he excluded by his brothers and sisters? Why was he excluded? Why was he actually rejected and taken away from the family? Okay, so he didn't share the same mother, right? He was considered to be different. He was different from them. That's why he was excluded, right? The question is, how often do we exclude people just because we think they're different? They might look different, they might have a different culture and background, but we sometimes exclude people from our company just because they're different. And I think the danger when we do that is that what happened to Jephtha when he was excluded? It says then that he became surrounded by worthless men that banded together with Jephtha and went raiding with him. Unfortunately, he ended up spending his time with worthless men because it's these worthless men that showed him any acceptance. If his own family showed him the acceptance, he wouldn't have been spending his time with worthless men. And we're going to see how that is going to have a very negative impact on him and his character and his behavior later on. So again, just a lesson for us is that sometimes when we exclude people, we sometimes forget that therefore they will only be able to find the company of other people that accept them, and these other people or other crowds might not always be the right crowd for them. Another thing to remember is that the exclusion of Jephtha was not according to God's teachings and commandments to the people of Israel. If we read in Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 20, it actually says, "The soul who sins shall die. The son shall not bear the guilt of the father, nor the father bear the guilt of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself." Now we read that verse, and I think the first thing that comes to us, and rightfully so, is that we cannot be judged for the guilt or the sin of somebody else. And that's absolutely fine. That's fair. So what they did to Jephtha was not appropriate. It was not according to God's commandment. But we also need to remember that the other side of the coin means what? We cannot gain the righteousness just because our parents are righteous. You don't get righteousness from somebody just like you don't get the wickedness from somebody else. It all depends on us and our own faith and our own works. We will not be able to inherit neither righteousness nor wickedness from our parents. So that's really important, okay? All right. So we then move on. It then came to pass after a time that the people of Ammon made war against Israel, and so it was, when the people of Ammon made war against Israel, that the elders of Gilead went to get Jephtha from the land of Tob. Then they said to Jephtha, "Come and be our commander, that we may fight against the people of Ammon." So Jephtha said to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and expel me from my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress?" And the elders of Gilead said to Jephtha, "This is why we have turned again to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the people of Ammon, and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So Jephtha said to the elders of Gilead, "If you take me back home to fight against the people of Ammon, and the Lord delivers them to me, shall I be your head?" So, a couple of interesting things, right? So, the people of Gilead, or the people of Israel at the time, make a choice to go and find Jephtha and ask him to come and lead them into war. Because if you remember in the closing of chapter 10, before we got into here, the people of Ammon were already camped outside. The people of Israel knew that they have to get ready for war, but they said, "We have nobody to lead us into this world." So they're starting to look for a leader, to look for somebody to lead them through this war. Why would they go to Jephtha out of all people? Anybody remember? It was in the first chapter, in verse 1. well done. He was actually described as a man of valor. He was a strong man, and clearly he's built a reputation for himself of being a strong warrior. Now, of course, maybe he didn't use his strength in the right way because he was surrounded by worthless men, and they said they used to go raiding. Raiding means you raid people, you take things that don't belong to you by force. But he certainly built a reputation of himself for being a strong, probably courageous man who was victorious in a lot of the battles that he did. So that's why the people of Gilead, or the people of Israel, go out and actually seek Jephtha himself to come and be their leader. But a couple of things for us to reflect on before we move on. First of all, what does actually Jephtha ask for when they ask him to be their leader? He said, if I'm going to come back and be your leader, I also want, to lead you into war, I also need to become the leader of the people of Gilead, or the people of the Israelites. That to me, when I was reading it, he's trying to compensate for the injustice that he felt when they excluded him at the beginning, right? Because he was left with no inheritance, and certainly he was rejected because he was the son of a harlot. There was a dishonor in it. So he's trying to compensate for that, to say, if I come back, you have to give me honor to be the leader, and you're going to have to give me an inheritance. I will have to own and be the ruler of all that land. Okay? So he's trying to sort of make up for old days, if you like. But the other thing to sort of remember here is that the people of Gilead chose Jephtha. And I thought that was really, really interesting, because we know, so far anyway, that with all the judges, who makes the choice? God makes the choice. God chooses the judge that will lead the people. Whereas this time, when we read in chapter 10, Israelites saying, oh, we've sinned, forgive us, we'll do anything you want us to do to be able to lead us into victory. But they never wait for God to make the choice. They never wait for God to choose the right person that he will use, because it's God's power, it's God's intervention, it's God's leadership that will lead them towards peace. They say, we want you to lead us into peace, but guess what? We will choose the person to do that for us. So that was actually quite an interesting thing. It's almost a gradual deterioration in the relationship between Israel and God. What I mean by that, their ability to follow and understand his commandments, the more they sin and the more they verge away from God, the less they're able to understand and follow the commandments according to God's expectation. So the first thing they do here is that they go and choose the judge, as opposed to wait for God to actually tell them who that judge should be. I also saw or came across a nice contemplation, if you like, that Jephtha represents to some degree Christ here, because Christ was initially rejected by the people of Israel, but then we, as the Gentiles and the people of Israel later on in the day, will go and ask him to be their leader again. But he initially was actually rejected by them. So we carry on. And the elders of Gilead said to Jephtha, the Lord be a witness between us if we do not do according to your words. Then Jephtha went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. And Jephtha spoke all his words before the Lord in Mizpah. So, this is verse 10. And it's the first time we hear the word Lord. So far, it's always been, according to my wisdom, my understanding, we choose. They went and negotiated with Jephtha. Jephtha negotiated back what he wants in return. God was not part of that equation at all. And it's only here or now that we start to see any mention of the Lord. And despite that they did not consult God, they did not wait for him to make the choice, God chooses in his mercy to work through Jephtha, who was chosen by the people, and use him to take the people of Israel away from the difficulties of being slaves to their sort of neighbors, or obviously having war with the Ammonites at the time. And that's almost a theme that we see repetitive time and time again. This is not the first, and it truly will not be the last time that God in his mercy decides to use the weak, decides to use the rejected, decides to use the different to be able to bring not just victory to the people, but glory to his name. Because if you use somebody strong and you get victory, people might assume it's because so-and-so is very wise, very clever, very strong. It's because of their skills and their virtues that they were able to do that. But when God chooses the weak, the rejected, the different, to be able to bring victory, it's a way to remind us that it was God who was working through that person to bring the victory. So it brings glory to the name of God. And we see that. He did that with Joseph. He did that with David. Did that with Gideon earlier on. And obviously he's doing it now with Jephtha as well. And St. Paul reminds us of that in the book of Corinthians, chapter 1, verses 27 to 29, when St. Paul writes, "But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised, God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence." The glory has to always be to God when we use the weak to make the mighty things happen. And we also see that Jephtha himself starts to sort of understand that God has a big role to play in using him to bring this victory. So he starts to speak to the Lord and pray. And that was a sign of obedience from Jephtha. So Jephtha says, listen, I will do whatever I can, and I will use whatever skills or gifts I currently have to serve God's purpose. So that certainly is a very positive thing that Jephtha did, and that's why God chose him, because God could see what's in his heart. He could see that he'll be willing to include God and rely in him to be able to bring that victory to the people of Israel. We all following so far? Okay? All right. Let's have a look. Okay, this is a bit of a long chapter, sort of a long section, if you like, but I just want us to go through it, and then we'll talk through it quickly. All right. So the next part of the story goes like this. So now Jephtha sent messengers to the king of the people of Ammon, saying, "What do you have against me, that you have come to fight against me in my land?" And the king of the people of Ammon answered the messengers of Jephtha, "Because Israel took away my land when they came out of Egypt, from the Ammon as far as the Jabbok, and to the Jordan. Now therefore restore those lands peacefully." So Jephtha again sent messengers to the king of the people of Ammon, and said to him, "Thus says Jephtha, Israel did not take away the land of Moab, nor the land of the people of Ammon. For when Israel came out of Egypt, they walked through the wilderness as far as the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. There Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, Please let us pass through your land. But the king of Edom would not heed. And in like manner they sent to the king of Moab, but he did not consent. So Israel remained in Kadesh, and they went along through the wilderness and bypassed the land of Edom and the land of Moab, came to the east side of the land of Moab, and encamped on the other side of the Arnon. But they did not enter the border of Moab, for the Ammon was the border of Moab. Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, Please let us pass through your land into your place. But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory, so Sihon gathered all his people together, encamped in Jahaz, and fought against Israel. And the Lord God of Israel delivered Sihon and all his people into the land of Israel. But they defeated them. And they defeated him, as in Israel defeated the people of the Amorites. Thus Israel gained possession of all the land of the Amorites who inhabited that country. they took possession of all the territory of the Amorites from the Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the wilderness to the Jordan. Bit of a long chapter. Now you got to understand, this was literally almost a letter that Jephtha wrote to the king of Ammon. When I first read this, or when you first read this, what's the first thing that comes to your mind about Jephthah's approach? Reasonable, all right? Anything else? He's trying to pursue peace. He's trying to avoid war, okay? So reasonable, trying to approach peace. Is it wise? Okay, it's wise. He's trying to sort of negotiate. When I first read it, I thought, actually, he's not just a strong man, as in, strong and mighty, and probably has a bit of pride that he says, nobody can defeat me. I can go to war and I could win anything. There's some degree of wisdom that actually says, I can actually approach this in a different way and maybe avoid war altogether. There is some people certainly that read this chapter with that lens, with that understanding, and that's why they refer, or at least they can sort of think that these are signs of wisdom from Jephtha. But I was really interested to find out that many others read this chapter, and I wouldn't say church fathers as such, but theologians, people that study the Bible, if you like, and they said that's actually a sign of foolishness. Because what was he expecting the king of Ammon to do in return? This king left his kingdom, took his army, is literally camped outside the land of Israel, ready to capture his land, or not ready to go to war. And when he was asked, why are you coming to war? He said, this is my land, I want it back. And Jephtha thought, if I write him a message explaining some of the factual things in history, that this is not accurate, that he will just say, I'm really sorry, it was a misunderstanding. I thought you took my land, but now I'm going to go back. Wasn't really. And it just shows you sometimes that he wasn't maybe as a mature warrior as he maybe thought of himself. Okay? So I thought that was really, really interesting. I also thought there was a couple of really interesting things here. First of all, we know that Jephtha didn't know that full history himself, clearly, right? Because he was not brought up to study the Torah and the Old Testament. So the only way he would know that, I thought, this is just my reflection, right? There's no church fathers or anything. He must have some advisors around him, all right? People that know that history really, really well, and they advised him that this actually, or what the king was claiming, is not actually true. So I thought that was really good, that he actually understood to some degree his limitation, and he had advisors around him, and the advisors told him that this was not actually factual. And I thought that was actually a good thing for him to do as well. But it's really interesting that when he described the history, which is well documented, if you go back in the book of Deuteronomy, I think it's chapter 2, and in the book of Numbers, it clearly describes what he actually summarized here as in factual pieces of history. It is actually true that the people of Israel did not actually take the land of the, it's a bit tricky, I know, but just there is a difference. Not the land of the Ammonites with an N, they took the land of the Amorites with an R, okay? It's a slight difference, but it's actually really, really important. And back to the sort of the difference between wisdom or foolishness, if you like, some of the theologians that sort of thought that this is foolishness, it's not only because of the worldly approach, that actually it was very naive to think that the king will actually change his mind. Jephtha needed to fully understand that this is not a worldly fight. This is not a worldly war that he is having with the king of the Ammonites. It's a spiritual war, because he is representing Israel, who represent God, and this was the land that God promised them. So this is a spiritual war that he is leading with with the guidance of God himself. It was not just his war from a worldly perspective to lead and win. This is a spiritual war, and he actually needed to appreciate and understand that. And I thought the lesson for us as we go through and we read these things, that he is trying to compromise with the enemy. The king of Ammon is his enemy. And instead of facing that enemy who's trying to claim and take something that is yours, instead of defending what is yours because you genuinely believe it's yours, you're trying to compromise. And again, that was not a wise thing to do. And we're going to see later on why actually there is more foolishness than wisdom in the decision that actually Jephtha took. The other lesson I thought that was really, really interesting is that why is he having to go through all that history? Well, that's actually not the question I was trying to ask. If you reflect on all that history and you just pause for a second, why is Jephtha finding himself in a position that he has to fight the king of Ammon? It's a simple question, but it might sound complicated. Why is he actually finding himself today, and that time, having to fight the king of Ammon? If you go back with your memory far enough, when the people of Israel were led out by Moses into the wilderness, it was never intended for them to have long-winded fights with anybody because God already promised them the promised land. Moses was supposed to lead them through the wilderness, and they were going to get into the promised land and claim it as God promised. The problem was when they decided to doubt God's judgment, doubt God's promise, and they sent spies into the land, and then the spies came back, and two of those spies, we know where? Who are the two of the spies that believed? Joshua and Caleb. They're the only two that came back, and they said, they saw it with a positive lens. It's a land that's full of milk and honey. It's great. God has got amazing things waiting for us. The other 10 spies said, this is a disaster. These guys are giants. It's fortified cities. We stand no chance. It's because they doubted in God's promise that they lingered in that land for a much, much longer time, and they started to make enemies with all these other tribes, and they had to go through this whole commotion of having to sort of negotiate and go into war with these other tribes. So when I was reading through that, I was thinking, the reason he has to do that today is because in the very, very outset of this, if the people of Israel trusted in God's promise and they followed in his guidance with faith, none of that would have been an issue. They wouldn't have to do any of that. But unfortunately, because of their initial actions, they now have to do all of that. Did I lose the thing again? Here we go. All right? Okay. We move on. So just to summarize, the king says, I'm coming here to take my land. Jephtha sends a letter back saying, your understanding of the facts are incorrect. This was never your land. This was given to us, and we're actually in our land. So he's trying to sort of negotiate something between them. And the king of Ammon is not really taking much notice of that negotiation. Well, not yet anyway. It hasn't actually proven to be successful. We'll see what happens. So verse 23. And now the Lord God of Israel has... So Jephtha is still explaining, if you like. This is the second part of Jephthah's explanation. So talk about foolishness or wise. His first letter was not long enough. So this is a continuation to his letter. He still hasn't finished making his point yet. He's going to go on to carry and explain. So this is Jephtha speaking. And now the Lord God of Israel has disposed the Ammonites from before his people Israel. Should you then possess it? Will you not possess whatever Shemosh your God gives you to possess? So whatever the Lord our God takes possession of before us, we will possess. And now, are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever strive against Israel? Did he ever fight against them? While Israel dwelt in Heshbon and its villages, in Aroer of the Aran for 300 years, why did you not recover them within that time? Therefore, I have not sinned against you, but you wronged me by fighting against me. May the Lord, the judge, render judgment this day between the children of Israel and the people of Ammon. Continuing on the same theme, but it actually has a slightly different feel to it this time. Okay, so the first part of the letter was more a negotiation based on facts. what the history actually says. This part of the letter, Jephtha does two really interesting things, and I think it's worth pausing and just talking about them just for a second. First of all, he is acknowledging and appreciating that the land that we currently are on is a gift from God to us. And again, the first thing I want us to pause and reflect on in our own life, do we acknowledge and appreciate the things that God gifts us in our lives? And therefore, we are ready to fight for it. And it doesn't have to be physical possessions. It could be our family, the company, the church that we have, the faith, the grace, all the things that we sometimes take for granted. I think the first thing that I really liked here is Jephtha acknowledges that the land was not theirs, but it was given to them by God. And because it's a gift from God, he appreciates it, and now he's willing to fight for it. And that's something maybe for us to reflect on. The other part I thought was really, really nice, and I wanted to share that with you, right? Jephtha now is starting to appreciate that this war is not for him to win as Jephtha based on his strength. He is starting to really appreciate and understand that this is a divine spiritual war that has to be won because God is already leading that fight, not him. Where does he say that in all here? It's that verse 25. And now are you, he's speaking to the king of Ammon, are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Why is that of any relevance? Why is that important? If you go back and you read in the earlier books of the Old Testament what happened with the king Balak, Balak was the king of the Moab. And actually, what's the picture there? Can anybody remember? What's that picture representing? The donkey and Balaam, right? So that's part of the story of King Balak. So a quick summary, if you don't remember, Balak, the king of Moab, wanted to defeat the people of Israel, and he realized that as long as they are guided by their God, he will never have a chance to defeat them, because he heard what God did with them, with the pharaohs, and the fact that he opened the Red Sea in front of them, and they defeated Pharaoh, the strongest, probably most mighty kingdom of those days. And if they can do this against Pharaoh, there is no chance that he has to be able to defeat them. So he then said, the only way I can defeat the people of Israel is if I can get their God to be away from them. And because of their culture in those days, there was only two ways to describe your relationship with your God. Either you are blessed by God, your God, or you are cursed by your God. It doesn't actually have any other options. So he asked, and he found out that there was a prophet, a really mighty prophet, which is Balaam. And he called him and he offered him so many riches and so many treasures and so many honor. And he said, the one thing I want from you is curse the people of Israel. Because if you curse them, they will lose the war. And of course, we know that Balaam did not curse the people of Israel. Balak was a very clever king. And he said, well, if I cannot get Balaam to curse the people of Israel, the only way I can distance them from their God, if it's not by a curse, is by what? Getting them to commit sin and break a commandment. So he then enticed them with mixing with the people of Moab, committing adultery, taking women and wives from that tribe, which was against their commandments. And by doing that and getting them to break one of the commandments and be distanced from God, he was then able to win the war against them. And it was really nice that Jephtha is talking to the king of Ammon, and he says, if Balak himself in all his power and his might in those days, who was certainly much stronger than you as the king of Ammon, could not defeat us because he knew that God is in our side, what chance do you have? What makes you think you can defeat us when God is on our side? So he's starting to realize that this is God's war, not his, but to start to have trust and faith that God actually is going to lead him to victory through that word. Yeah? Okay? So that was just something I wanted to share with you. All right? So just like I said, the one thing I want us to take in this before we move on is that Jephtha now is starting to have faith that God is actually going to lead him through that war. Let's see how far this faith goes. Oops. He sends the letter to the king of Ammon, so the king of Ammon is now going to respond. However, the king of the people of Ammon did not heed the words which Jephtha sent him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephtha, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he advanced towards the people of Ammon. And Jephtha made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. So what's happened? He sent the letter to the people of Ammon, the king of Ammon. The king of Ammon says, nah, actually the word did not heed. If you actually read the exact translation from the Greek, it actually means that he completely dismissed this thing, thinking that it's completely worthless. All right? So he just thought it was absolute rubbish, what he was trying to tell him, all right? And again, back to the point that we tried earlier. This is what happens when you try to compromise and negotiate with the enemy. The enemy will look at you and think you're weak, and all your negotiations are completely worthless. But then, two things happen. When it says that the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephtha, the Spirit of the Lord can only come on you if you what? If you ask for it and you pray. So we're starting to see that Jephtha is slowly starting to get closer to God, starting to rely on him, starting to invite him to be the leader of this war. So the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Jephtha because Jephtha started to pray, started to get closer to God. But then he does something really unusual. He makes a vow that if he wins this war, he will offer a sacrifice to God. And before we get into the details, my question is, why did he make a vow? Okay? He's following Abraham. Did Abraham make a vow? Made a covenant with God. Who started the covenant? God. So Abraham did not start the covenant, and it certainly was not a vow. But Jephtha made a vow. And in the interest of time, that's because he was still doubtful. Still not really sure that he's going to be able to win the war. So he's trying to say, well, God, if you really support me and you make me win this war, I will offer you a sacrifice. So the first thing is that that's actually, unfortunately, a sign of his faith not being as strong as we saw it just literally 2 verses ago. Standing in front of the king of Ammon saying, you're not even Balak, and Balak could not defeat us because God is on our side. But the minute he starts to get ready to go to war, he has his doubts. He has his fears. He's really unsure. And the way he deals with that is by making a vow to God. 2 interesting things to keep in mind before we move on very quickly. The first thing is, the word whatever, if you go back to the Orthodox Study Bible, which is the more accurate translation, I should say, that word is whoever. Now, there's a big difference. It's a slight difference, but it's a very significant difference. Because by saying whoever, it means that Jephtha knew that it was going to be a human being of some sort that will come and greet him out of the house, and that he was prepared to offer that human being as a sacrifice to God. Why would Jephtha do that? 2 things. 1, why would he do a vow at all? We said because he's feeling weak. But vows were not a common thing, or at least certainly not a thing that was commonly done by the people of Israel. The reason he did a vow, and it's a vow for a human sacrifice, is because of his history, his background. He was excluded, and he was living in the wilderness surrounded by, what was the word? Worthless men. People that came from different cultures, with different religions, different beliefs, and he picked some of these habits from the people that were around him at that time. And I thought that's really, really important, because that's a really important lesson to us. If we allow ourselves to be surrounded by people of the world, we need to be very careful, because we might unconsciously be influenced by their thinking and their habits, and we might find ourselves starting to copy some of those habits that might just get us in trouble. So he made that vow, most probably, because that was a common thing that was done by the other pagan cultures around him at the time. It's a vow of a human sacrifice, which actually is a complete sin to God. How can you commit to doing something to please God? He was trying to sort of say, thank you. If you help me to win the war, I will thank you by offering you a human sacrifice. It shows that because he was far away from God in his youth, he didn't really know what things please God and what things displease God. So it's again a reminder for us, the more time we spend with God and the more times we know about the things that please him, hopefully that will not be able to make the same mistake. Make sure that I don't take too much time. All right, so it's okay? All right. All right. Got 3 more slides. You okay? 3 more slides. Should we finish? Okay. All right. Just very quickly, because we're talking about vows. The vows actually, the significance of vows in the Old Testament is very, very well documented. If you read in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 23, verses 21 to 23, it says, when you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and it would be sin to you. So if you don't deliver that vow, it would be sin to you. But if you abstain from vowing, it shall not be sin to you. That which has gone from your lips you shall keep and perform, for you voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. So the important thing is, if you say a vow, you have to deliver that vow. But it clearly says in Deuteronomy, you shouldn't vow, because it's not a sin not to vow. But if you vow, you're going to have to keep your vow. But actually try to stay away from it, because it's not a sin not to vow. You're not committed to vowing as such. So then we carry on with the story. So Jephtha advanced toward the people of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. And he defeated them from Aroer as far as Meneth, 20 cities, and to Abel Keramim with a very great slaughter. Thus the people of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. When Jephtha came to his house at Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and dancing, and she was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. And it came to pass when he saw her that he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me, for I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it. So she said to him, My father, if you have given your word to the Lord, do to me according to whatever has gone out of your mouth, because the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the people of Ammon. Then she said to her father, Let this thing be done to me. Let me alone for 2 months, that I may go and wander on the mountains and bewail my virginity, my friends and I. So he said, Go, and he sent her away for 2 months. And she went with her friends and bewailed her virginity on the mountains. And it was so at the end of the 2 months that she returned to her father, and he carried out his vow with her which he had vowed. She knew no man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went 4 days each year to lament the daughter of Jephtha the Gileadite. So what happens is he goes to war God delivers the people of Ammon to his hand. And of course, as he comes back, like we saw the cover picture, the first person that comes out to greet him happens to be his daughter. And of course, he now understands that he has to fulfill the vow that he made. So my first question was, did he have to commit that vow? But we read in Deuteronomy that if you say a vow, you have to deliver that vow. So what are his choices here? He has no choice, okay? What else? Two wrongs don't make a right. He's already made a mistake by making a vow to please God by breaking one of the commandments. Carrying on that vow, because he's convinced that he has to deliver his vow, doesn't make it any better. If he broke his vow and he did not deliver it to God, it's still a sin. It's not the right thing to do. It's still a sin. But it's a sin that's between him and God. By committing the vow, it's still a sin, but it's now a sin that brought in another innocent person who had to lose their life as a consequence of that. So two wrongs don't make a right. And I think that's the lesson I wanted us to pose in for a second. Sometimes we will all make mistakes, but it's important to pause, confess our mistakes, repent, but actually two wrongs don't make a right. Somebody saying something? Sorry, no. The other thing I thought was really interesting, did you see his daughter's reaction? Did his daughter resist what he had to do? She was very submissive. And I was reading that and I was thinking, how many of our children are that submissive today? I mean, God, if I tell my children to get off the screen, I hear a lecture and a fight at home. He was actually going to sacrifice her, and she was actually very submissive. Just shows you maybe the different way we're bringing out children nowadays. I just wanted to sort of point out a quick word before we move on. And it said that she was going to go to the mountains to bewail her virginity. What's the word bewail mean? It just means to mourn, feel sorry, okay? And it's not just her virginity as such, it's that she doesn't have a family, she's not been able to sort of live as an adult, so she was obviously just mourning the fact that she's going to have to be sacrificed as a youth and actually not be able to sort of enjoy her life as an adult. That was chapter 11. That was pretty much 90% of the story of Jephtha. We've got only one slide to go, 2 slides, which is Ephraim and then the end, and then that hopefully will take us to the end of the story. After everything settles, go ahead. Go ahead. About. So my personal opinion, I mean, yeah, I'll give you my personal opinion based on what I've read, just to be clear, right? Because my opinion doesn't really matter here. But like I said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. He was going to sin either way, okay? There was really no right choice here. If he breaks his vow, that is a sin against God, because God said if you make a vow, you must be able to keep that vow. So it was a sin, and he was going to get punished for that sin in one way, form, or another. We don't know how. But by carrying on his vow, it is still a sin, and he was still going to get punished for that in one way or another, because he's just killed another innocent human being, and he offered a human sacrifice to God, which is something that God said that he doesn't actually want. So the question was, if he chose the first option, which is to break the vow, at least it's a breaking of vow. It's a sin just between him and God. And we've seen this with David. If you remember, when David committed adultery with Bathsheba, and he went to repent to God, and he was given options of the different ways that he could actually face the consequences of his sin. He submitted himself. He made a choice to submit himself in God's hand, because he knew that God eventually will have mercy. And Jephtha could have done the same thing. He could have just chosen the first option, which is to break the vow, and at least it becomes something between him and God, and it doesn't actually impact everybody else. But by choosing the second option, which to some degree, and God forgive me, I'm not making a judgment at all, but because he's now a king, and he is seen to have to stick to his word, there might have been an element of pride. That how can I start leading the people if the first promise I've made, I've already broken? There's an element there that might be, I have to keep my promise, and therefore there was an element of choosing the second option as opposed to the first. Either one was wrong, but the second time, an innocent human being, forget the fact that she's his daughter. I mean, he was willing to sacrifice any human being that walked out of his house. An innocent person was going to lose their life and be offered a sacrifice just based on a foolish decision that he made. Is that all right? So the war is finished, everything is done, he's come back, celebrating the victory, and then something really interesting happens. Then the men of Ephraim gathered together, crossed over towards Zaphon, and said to Jephtha, why did you cross over to fight against the people of Ammon and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house down on you with fire. And Jephtha said to them, my people and I were in a great struggle with the people of Ammon. And when I called you, you did not deliver me out of their hands. So when I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life in my hands and crossed over against the people of Ammon, and the Lord delivered them into my hand. Why then have you come to me this day to fight against me? In the interest of time, we're not going to dwell too much into that, but there's a couple of things to keep in mind. If you remember the story of Gideon, this is a repeat of exactly what happened. Gideon goes out, he fights the people of Moab, the Ammonites, and when he comes back, the people of Ephraim come to him and say, you didn't call us to fight with you, and now we're going to take our revenge. Same thing again. Ephraim does the same thing with Jephtha. He comes back from victory, and they come back, say, after everything was done, how dare you go and fight without us? Which is not even true, because he says, I've asked you, and you decided not to come along. It was a really interesting explanation about this. Ephraim was the biggest and the strongest of the tribes of Israel. They had a lot of pride because they felt that they're the strongest and the biggest, and they wanted to be part of every victory so that they can be celebrated when the victory comes. But they didn't always want to do the hard work. They didn't want to do the hard work with Gideon, and they certainly did not want to do the hard work with Jephtha. But what I thought is actually really interesting is how Gideon and Jephtha dealt with the people of Ephraim when they did that. Do you remember? Have you covered Gideon already? Yeah? How did Gideon react?
He seemed to give them a bit of grace by basically letting them feel like they were part of the whole process, but they were just tidying up at the end, I think, by chasing the two kings.
Exactly. So with Gideon,
with humility.
You're absolutely right. With Gideon, they didn't fight. They waited until the Moabites were running away in fear, and they decided to chase them away and kill a few people and say, look at us, we sort of helped you get the victory. But Gideon, in his wisdom and in his humility and in his grace, decided to sort of make them feel like they played a part so that he can calm things down and not cause any division between the people of Israel. Jephtha, on the other hand, back to the foolishness, wisdom balance that we're trying to see, they came to him out of pride to say, how dare you not include us? How could we not be part of this victory? And in his pride, as the new leader of the people of Israel, he says, hang on, I came to you, you said no, and now you're coming to threaten me. What does he do? He decides to go to war against the people of Ephraim. And back to what we said before, every time the people of Israel break some of the commandments and they distance themselves a little bit further away from God, we see an erosion in their relationship with God and their ability to maintain themselves as the chosen people. Because that, in our modern term day, we call this civil war. It's a war between two factions of the same people. They're both Israelites. And they just came out of victory. They've just defeated their enemy to claim their land. but they're starting to have a civil war internally between them because of pride. The pride of the people of Ephraim, but certainly the pride of Jephtha himself. Let's finish quickly. Now Jephtha gathered together all the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim, and the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim, because they said, "You Gileadites are fugitives of Ephraim among the Ephraimites and among the Manassanites." The Gileadites seized the fords of the Jordan before the Ephraimites arrived, and when the Ephraimite who escaped said, when any Ephraimite who escaped said, "Let me cross over," the men of Gilead would say to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" If he said no, then they would say to him, "Then say Shibboleth." And he would say Siboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they would take him and kill him at the fords of the Jordan. There fell at that time 42,000 Ephraimites. Couple of things to mention before we close. They called him, so this is the Ephraim, the people, the Ephraimites, called Jephtha and the Gileadites, so Jephtha and his people, "You are fugitives." I initially sort of glanced over that word. Didn't really register with me much, to be honest with you. And then as we were reading some of the reflections and the contemplations about the story of Jephtha, it came to me, and I kind of just paused for a second. Who's a fugitive? I have to raise your voice, I'm sorry.
If you run away from your own country.
Okay, if you run away because you've done something wrong. What was Jephthah's origin? A son of a harlot, and what was he living as? He was living as a what? As a fugitive. He was living as a raider, somebody who steals and kills, and as soon as he steals and kills, he does what? He runs away. So that was a big insult. They were almost reminding him of his roots. You think you're a king now? Remember? You were just a fugitive. You're a criminal who used to run away and hide every time you did something wrong. So it's not a loving sort of relationship or choice of words between people of the same faith. The word ford, do you know what a word ford means? Very close.
Branch off.
Okay, so it's a branch from the river. You're absolutely right. You're both right. In those days, there was no bridges. So the only way to cross a river is that you have to find a really narrow part of the river where the water gets shallow so that you can actually cross to the other side. There was no bridges. So you had no choice. If you wanted to cross a river, that was the only place that you would cross the river. I didn't know that, I've got to be honest with you. I had to look this up. But the last thing to mention is that 42,000. Civil war. Killed his own people because of pride. Last but not least, this is the last slide, I promise. And I'm sorry if we went a little bit over. And Jephtha judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephtha the Gileadite died and was buried among the cities of Gilead. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel, and he had 30 sons. And he gave away 30 daughters in marriage and brought in 30 daughters from elsewhere for his sons. He judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. After him, Elon, the Zebulonite, judged Israel. He judged Israel 10 years. And Elon, the Zebulite, died and was buried at Ajalon in the country of Zebulun. After him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 young donkeys. He judged Israel 8 years. Then Abon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, died and was buried in Pirathon in the land of Ephraim in the mountains of the Amalekites. And glory be to God forever and ever. Amen. Now, that is the end of the story of Jephtha. But that's a really interesting part of the chapter. 7 verses mentions the story of 3 judges. And I thought that was really, really interesting. they mention nothing about those judges at all. They just say that they came, they stayed, they had a lot of money. Donkeys were a sign of riches in those days. They had a lot of sons, a lot of daughters. No mention whatsoever. And it made me reflect that when you hear about Joshua as a judge, the Bible says that in his days, the people followed, the people served the Lord. During the days of Joshua, the people served the Lord. When we talk about Gideon, it says that the people played the harlot after him, but not during his time. So when he was a judge, the people followed God, and they were very committed to their commandments. It's only after he died that they started to sort of go and worship other gods. A lot of the other judges, when you read their stories, they will find a repetitive thing where they say, and the land was at rest. None of that here. Now, please, may God forgive me, I'm not saying these are not good judges. I'm just saying that they came and they went, and it doesn't look that they left a legacy behind them. And that was the last lesson I wanted us to reflect on. What legacy do we want to leave behind? Is that people will say that we had a lot of donkeys, a lot of riches, we had a lot of children, we had a lot of knowledge, we had a lot of wisdom. Or they will say that when we are around, we help people serve the Lord. When we are around, we gave the people around us some rest. I pray that God will guide us and use us, that we can have a legacy that is worthy of his calling and worthy of the purpose that he's going to lead us to be able to pursue, to serve his people in humility and in humbleness. And glory be to God forever and ever. Amen. I'm really sorry I kept you late.